My name is Ives. I'm 78. I live in a modest house on the outskirts of a town where the air always smells either of smoke or of indifference. This house was once full of voices, laughter, bustle. Now it's quiet. Too quiet. Like a hospital ward after a patient's death, tidy, clean, empty. My children, Marco and Natalia, live in the city. High positions, apartments with panoramic windows, status. I used to lift them off my knees, literally. I wasn't afraid of working 16 hours a day. I wasn't afraid of loans, risks, debts. Their future was my project. And now? They call once a month. On an automatic phone. Like a formality. In conversations, I hear not voices, but a checklist. Dad, you okay? Okay. Hang in there. We're busy. Their children, my grandchildren, don't call me Grandpa. Just, hello. Like an acquaintance, like a waiter in a cafe, like a person who must be tolerated for the sake of an inheritance. Maxim, the eldest, is sitting on the phone when I come. I try to tell something, a story from the past, an anecdote, a parable. And he throws a short, okay, Grandpa, but I'm busy right now. Busy. With a life in which there is no place for me. I go to the store, and the saleswoman doesn't look me in the eye. As if I were a phantom. I ask about a promotion, and I hear a dry, read the stand. At the post office, the same. At the hospital, even worse. When I talk about chest pain, the doctor takes off his glasses and says, "You're old." That's normal. And I want to scream, that's not normal. It's abnormal when you're perceived as an object. Like an old wardrobe that hasn't been moved because it's still standing. I get up every day at 6 a.m. I sit by the window with coffee. I watch my neighbors hurry somewhere, my children go to school, young mothers pull strollers. Everyone has a goal. I only have time. Time and silence. My hands are tired, calloused, and hold nothing. They used to build, create, and manage. Now they only tremble when I try to open a jar of jam. My voice used to resonate in conference rooms. Today, it only sounds out loud to myself. Sometimes I read books. More often, I just keep quiet. I have forgotten what laughter sounds like in my house. But do you know what the scariest thing is? Not loneliness. But when you start to get used to it. I was once the backbone of this family. They listened to me, they respected me. I was a rock. And now I am sand blown away by the wind of everyday life. I listen to the tree in the yard crackling, it is as old as I am. And I think, which of us will fall first? There is a diary in the closet. No one has seen it. There are no notes in it yet, only blank pages. But lately something has begun to move inside me. Something dark, cold. Like winter water in an underground well, quiet but deep. I look at the people passing by me and I catch myself doing something strange. I start to count. Not days. People. Those who didn't notice. Those who neglected. Those who forgot who I was. I'm not looking for pity. And I'm not asking for love. I just don't want to be a shadow anymore. And maybe I'm not one anymore. I was sitting on the porch when it started. Autumn. The leaves were swirling in the wind, like memories, golden, dead, relentless. I held a mug of black coffee in my hand, and through its bitterness on my tongue I could taste the years. Years that I had lived for a reason. But who cares now? Back then, back in the 80s, I was nobody. My father drank, my mother was silent. No one taught me how to love, but I quickly learned to survive. At 20, I slept in a trailer at a construction site. I ate bread and salt and read newspapers a week late. But there was a fire burning inside me. The fire of a man who doesn't agree to live on his knees. I was walking on heads, yes, I admit it. But not out of cruelty, out of a desire to break free. Then, the first money. Small, honest. Then, Business, deals, night negotiations, risks. They beat me, and I beat them back. I learned to count people by their eyes. I understood who was lying, who was afraid, who would betray me. And I survived. I created a company from scratch. And another one. In 10 years, I had 36 employees, 2 offices, several cars, and a full bathtub into which my son, then a boy, would throw toy ships. I remember that laugh. I remember holding my daughter in my arms when she first got sick, and staying up all night. I was a rock for them. They said, "Dad, she can do anything." And I was able to. I invested everything in them. When Natalia wanted to study in Poland, I sold a third of the business. When Marco decided to buy an apartment in the center, I gave money without expecting gratitude. And I didn't get it. Not then, not later. Just a dry, "Thank you, Dad." Like a letter of gratitude for charity. I lost my wife. Cancer. We weren't perfect, we often argued, she got tired of my pace, I got tired of her silence. But when she was gone, I suddenly felt what it was like to be alone. And from that day on, this emptiness only grew. When the company burned down after the crisis, I didn't ask my children for help. I sold everything, with pride. Because I didn't want to be a burden. I had enough pension and sense not to get drunk. I survived again. But for some reason, the children began to treat me like a loser. Like a symbol of the past, from which it is better to distance themselves. Their colleagues didn't know me, and that suited them. Because how do you explain that your dad is the same Ostap who once commanded the market and now looks for the cheapest milk at ATB? I was pushed out. Not with words, with looks. Silent pauses on holidays. Forgotten birthdays. And the worst thing, with indifference. I remembered one of my competitors, Vilinsky. We once fought for a contract. I won, and he said to my face, "You are strong. But remember, the world does not forgive the strong when they become weak." At the time, I laughed at that. And now I understand, he was right. In my house, portraits. Me, in a suit, with diplomas, with a smile. Now I am just a shadow of that man. The person who was hidden behind nice words, while he was still breathing. And I am still breathing. In the closet, a box. There are documents, photos, old connections. People I helped raise and who still owe me. Some are alive. Some are dangerous. I have never used it. But sometimes I look through those names. Not out of nostalgia. But out of preparation. When pain becomes commonplace, it stops scaring. But it doesn't stop destroying. I started waking up not because of the alarm clock, but because of the silence. It pressed on my chest. I used to wake up to a text message, "Good morning, Dad." Now, I wake up to the fact that nothing sounds in the house except my own breathing. And then, with a thud. One day I felt sick. Suddenly, under my ribs, as if someone had stuck an ice knife there. I gathered myself, threw on a jacket, called a taxi, because I didn't want to bother the children. I arrived at the hospital. In the reception area there was a girl of about 25, chewing gum, not taking her eyes off the monitor. When I approached and said that I had a sharp pain, she didn't even look up. "It's your turn, Grandpa. All the old people are in pain." I didn't argue. I stood and waited. I sat on a hard plastic chair, my fingers gripping my side, and around me was a life I no longer belonged to. The doctor finally saw me. A young creature, self-confident, with glasses that had slipped down my nose. He looked at my tests, waved his hand. "You should eat less before bed, Mr. Ostap. At your age, it's normal. But this isn't the first time." "I feel something different," I said. He sighed, like a teacher dealing with a dull student. "Panicking is bad for the heart." Next. I left the office slowly, but something had already changed in me. I was no longer just offended, I had become dangerous. Something inside me was recording every detail, the doctor's face, his mannerisms, his name on his badge. It recorded it and wouldn't forget it. One day I went to see my son. Without warning. I wanted to see my grandson, if only for a minute. The daughter-in-law opened the door, her gaze was like a blade. Couldn't you have called? Dry. I wanted to see Maxim. He's preparing for the state exam. He's not here for you. I stood in the doorway, holding a package, honey, homemade dumplings, an old chessboard. She wouldn't let me in. Another time, okay. And closed the door. Her fingerprint remained on the package. I stared at it for a long time. Then I put everything under the door and left. In the evening, Maxim wrote just one word in the messenger, thank you. No emoticons, nothing. Like an automatic machine. Like a debt that needs to be paid. The next day I went into the store. I asked the young salesman to help me get the bottle off the top shelf. Can't you do it yourself? He mumbled. I thought businessmen like you had servants. I used to. Well, that's all. You'd better go to the Social Security office, they'll help you there. I didn't answer. I just watched. His words didn't hurt, they were cutting me like rust. And I wrote them down. In the literal sense, I came home and wrote in my diary, name, Sergey, salesman date, October 12th place, ECO market note, mockery, humiliation, superiority. I started keeping records. Every day, like a priest in a confessional. But I wasn't a saint. I was a memory. And this memory was brewing. The last straw was a public scene. I was leaving the store. I was carrying 2 bags, heavy, with cereals and canned goods. At the stop, my hand trembled, and everything fell to the ground. Rice, canned goods, a jar of jam, everything broke. I knelt down, trying to collect them. People were walking by. No one stopped. The 2 boys laughed, hey, Grandpa, is this a flash mob? Let's take another photo for TikTok. I looked up. My gaze was empty, like a well after a drought. Then I felt it, something was born inside me again. Not pain, icy calm. Not humiliation, determination. I stood up. Slowly. I looked at the sky. It was grey, as if made of ashes. And something old ignited in me. Something that had been dormant for a long time. Something that built businesses, defeated competitors, knew how to manipulate, how to make even the strongest feel weak. I was no longer a victim. And the silence of my home was no longer dead. It was filled with movement. It became a fireplace hall where plans are born. Plans that don't scream, but sharpen. Sharpen hearts. With fire. Cold. Calculation. My game had begun. That night I didn't sleep. The house was dark, only the old clock in the living room ticked like a distant countdown. I sat in the kitchen, looking at the wall, but I saw not plaster, but faces. There were many of them. All those who laughed, despised, passed by. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want blood. I wanted them to feel what has been living in me for years. What burns my bones from the inside? Indifference. But I wasn't going to be another old man with bitterness. I am Ostap. And if I have anything left, it is my mind. Cold. Strategic. The one that has been building, calculating, manipulating for decades. I took down an old board from the wall. A chessboard. I put it on the table. And I started playing with myself. Piece by piece. The pawn is my grandson. The knight became Serhi from the store. The bishop was that doctor. And the queen? The daughter-in-law. I took an old notebook from the shelf, which contained the phone numbers, names, and habits of people I had worked with back in the 90s. They weren't saints. But they were faithful. Because they knew, if Ostap promised something, he would do it. I started calling them. Slowly, calmly. Hello, Ivan. How are you? Ostap. Are you alive, brother? Alive. And I have a little business. Nothing criminal. I just need to find out something. And a little help one guy forget that he's the smartest. That's how it started. Data. Documents. Photos. Searching for connections. One of my old acquaintances works in real estate. Another works in the tax office. Another has access to medical records. I didn't break anything. I just became a mirror. They themselves destroyed everything, I only directed the light. Natalia. My daughter. On paper, she's the perfect mother, a successful lawyer, and socially active. But a friend of mine found something from the archives. In 2017, she represented the interests of a company that was later caught in a scam. Nothing big. But it was enough for an investigative journalist to receive an interesting anonymous letter. The result? An article. A scandal. A sudden suspension from the project. The whole image was shattered. Marco. My son. He always wanted recognition. And he will get it, through silence. His company began to be audited. Tax. One by one, accidentally. His partner began to doubt the feasibility of working together, because someone sent an extract about old unpaid debts that Marco was hiding. The partner broke the contract. He called me. Dad, do you have any connections? Everything is falling apart. I listened. Silently. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled. Maxim. Grandson. I didn't break him. I gave him a chance. I threw him a letter, anonymous. There were his own posts, screenshots where he made fun of old people, joked about grandfathers in the cemetery. The letter supposedly came from his school. Maxim thought one of the teachers had found it. He deleted the page. Then he wrote to me. Grandfather, I'm sorry. I'm an idiot. I just wasn't thinking. That was honest. Sir, he is a salesman. He got a call from the customer security center. They asked him to explain why he allowed himself to be rude to customers, including veterans. He didn't know it was me. He just ran around, looking for cameras in the store, apologizing to people he'd never apologized to. And the doctor? He received an internal check from the hospital administration. He was called. They forced him to explain why he refused to help a man with a potential heart attack. He wasn't fired. But his rating was lowered. And when he saw me in the hallway the next time, he stopped. Mr. Ostap. I apologize. I nodded. And walked past. No one knows it's me. Everyone thinks it's an accident, fate, a systemic error. But I know. And I don't need applause. I regained my dignity not with words, but with deeds. I didn't destroy it, I opened my eyes. And now, when I sit in silence again, this silence no longer oppresses. It is my ally. My armor. It wasn't anger that changed me. It was clarity that changed me. When you stand on the edge of silent oblivion, where no one calls your name, you either fall or learn to fly differently. I chose the latter. After that night when I started my game, I became different. Not better, not worse. Real. Ostap, who once raised businesses, and now, pulled himself out of the darkness. I returned to habits that I had long forgotten. I woke up at dawn, sat in a chair, watched the news, studied people, analyzed. Before, I managed projects, now I managed consequences. I didn't punish, no. I just led everyone to the mirror, where they saw not me, but themselves. Because the truth is one thing, no one wants to see their indifference. And I forced them. After calls, messages, subtly thrown rumors, unobtrusively thrown facts, they all began to change. We felt the ground shake a little. And we didn't know who had pulled the trigger. I didn't say a single word directly to anyone. I just did it, as always, strategically. I hinted to the doctor through an old acquaintance that the story of his rudeness would reach the administration. To my daughter, that her former deals were no longer a secret. to my son, that his partners didn't like surprises. And each of them reacted in their own way. But the most interesting thing was what happened next. After the blows, silence fell. No calls, no letters. Just the feeling that they suspected something. And then I saw, for the first time in years, a change. They started looking for me. One evening, Natalia arrived. Without warning. She stood on the doorstep, without the confidence in her eyes that she had carried all her life. "Dad. Are you home? Where else should I be?" I answered calmly. She was silent. Then, suddenly, she asked, "Have you been doing something? With those articles, with those checks?" I looked into her eyes. "What do you think?" She lowered her gaze. Not out of fear. Out of shame. For the first time, sincerely. "We haven't listened to you in a long time," she whispered. "And I'm sorry." It wasn't forgiveness. And not repentance. But it was the first time she spoke, not as a lawyer, but as a daughter. A day later, Marco called. His voice was broken. "Dad, let's meet." I need to talk to someone." We met in a cafe where he once showed me his first paycheck. His hand was shaking. Not out of fear, but out of inner collapse. "I thought I was strong," he said. "But you taught me what happens when you're alone with the consequences." I didn't say anything. Just nodded. He understood everything. Maxim. He came to me without words. He brought the same chessboard that I had left behind. "A game?" he asked. And we played. No phones, no sarcasm. Just a grandfather and a grandson. As it should be. My house was filled with a different kind of silence. Now it's not cold, it's deep. Now I know, I can be heard. My revenge? It wasn't an act of cruelty. It was a lesson. Quiet, measured, precise. A lesson that is not forgotten. Because it hurts, but it doesn't hurt. It changes, but it doesn't cripple. And most importantly, I found myself again. Not as a shadow. But as a man who made the world around him remember that old age is not a sentence, but an advantage. The world has changed. Not me. I just reminded myself who I was. And who I remained. They still don't call me on the air, they don't make an example of me in schools, they don't make films. I'm an old man in a grey coat who sits in his garden, drinks coffee without sugar, and watches the leaves fall to the ground. But now, when those who have never seen me before pass by my yard, they greet me. Not out of obligation, but out of respect. I didn't win a fight, I didn't make scandals, I didn't curse. I chose silence. But in this silence, every word of mine was a sentence, and every action was a mirror. My house became more crowded. Not noisy, but warm. Sometimes Maxim comes over, we cook borscht in silence. Natalia visits, brings documents to check, although I know that this is just an excuse to be there. Marco is calling for a birthday party again, and not just passing a piece of cake over the threshold. And I have learned not to wait. And not to forgive, like before. Because forgiveness without change is indulgence, not wisdom. And I am not indulgent. I left my diary in a drawer. The entries have not disappeared, but they no longer live in me. They are like an archive. As proof that I did not break down when everyone wrote me off the stage of life. Now I understand, old age is not the end. It is a summary. And it depends only on you whether it will be miserable or magnificent. People are afraid of old age, because they think it is a time to say goodbye. But I believe, it is a time to teach. My family has learned. Through pain, through doubt, through the collapse of their masks, but they have learned. And I have become not just a grandfather in photographs. I have become present. Visible. Tangible. Someone will say, "What has changed? Their attitude or your heart?" I will say, everything. Because once you demand respect, it may not come. But once you become respect, no one can avoid it anymore. I wasn't looking for love. I was demanding dignity. And now, when someone on the street says to me, "Mr. Ostap, good afternoon," I look straight into his eyes and nod, "Good. Very good." Because I'm no longer a shadow. I'm a man who has learned to be silent so that the whole world can hear you.
Subscribe and like. And tell your friends about this video.